Innovation runs in weeks, evidence cycles run in quarters or years. We are introducing digital into a very highly regulated environment. AI is a truly, if it's used correctly, is a really great augmentation tool, especially in healthcare. So it's not really a job replacement in that sense, but it unlocks opportunities for us to better support people that are suffering from disease. It's really empowering the innovator, the builder. It's helping us make better decisions and make more informed plans and products.
Understanding customers and patients has always been a challenge. Companies spend billions in surveys, interviews, and research programs. Yet the insights they get often fail to capture how people behave in real life. This is especially true in healthcare, where patient journeys are complex, emotional, and deeply personal. But what if we go beyond surveys? What if we could model the behavior itself, simulate decisions, and use AI to forecast how real people will act long before we launch a product or service? This is the promise of AI-powered behavioral modeling, digital twins, and simulation-grade evidence. I'm Lucas, and this is Dev in the Details, the podcast where we look at technology and business through a practical, honest lens. My guest today is Jeff Gombala, co-founder and CEO of Helios Innovation Lab and co-founder at Evidexa. Jeff has spent more than 10 years working at the intersection of digital health, behavioral science, and patient experience. He helps organizations turn early concepts into scalable digital products, build new service lines, and improve outcomes with AI-powered insights. Jeff, great to have you here. Let's talk about how AI is reshaping customer and patient understanding and how behavioral models are becoming next generation of research.
I appreciate it, Lucas. I look forward to the discussion, and thank you for having me on.
Fantastic. Welcome. So maybe for starters, if you could explain how you come to the place you are, how did your journey span over the years, and the interest in digital health and all of the aspects of that led to your co-founding of Helios and Evidexa.
Yeah, no, it's quite the journey, and I'll spare the details because it could go quite deep quickly. But I've been, as you introduced, I've been involved in digital health now at the intersection of both the innovators, the people building the solutions, as well as the adopters. So we say innovators are those digital health sponsors, be it a startup, be it through VC funding, or be it pharma sponsored. And then you have adopters, which themselves could be, large health systems, be it private or public in nature, as well as pharmaceutical companies as well. But I've worked in that intersection for 10 years with the main mission to support people suffering from disease. So very mission-driven person. And what I've seen time and time again is the same repeating failure pattern, right? We are introducing digital into a very highly regulated environment,
right,
where it's very difficult to understand, the disease, let alone the regulatory complexity that we operate in. So you have digital on one hand that evolved quickly, as we know for the value what digital is. And on the other hand, you have this evidence body that needs to exist, which evolves very slowly. Innovation runs in weeks, evidence cycles run in quarters or years. And that's what kind of brought me to this intersection of founding Evidexa, really to help close that gap in how we can launch health tech solutions and make sure that they can reach the scale and the promise that they have. Helios Innovation Lab is a means to an end in many ways, where it's our bootstrap consultancy firm. So we believe in the power of bootstrapping to build Evidexa, and so we use Helios to support our clients with consulting services at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's fascinating. Do you feel like maybe, as I was listening to you, that question crossed my mind? As in software, we have all of these different environments, including staging and testing and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Would it make sense to do something similar in a legal aspect for healthcare? So we could actually have a group of people, an audience, right, for a clinical trial where people agree to be part of something, even if it's uncharted territory, for sake of speeding up innovation?
Yeah, there's definitely, so there's tools out there that we use today, right? The same tools that we'd use in non-healthcare settings, right? We use things like usertesting.com. We use personas in many ways to help us navigate, and we use small patient panels. The risk with all of that is they're all state-based, meaning if I'm a part of a panel as a patient and I raise my hand, I'm part of this small group of people, I, as Jeff, represent, one perspective, and I'm influenced by the state I'm in, not necessarily the disposition of my behavior. And what we know from behavioral science is that our state changes based on environment. I might have woken up, in a bad mood. I might not have had my coffee or something. But what we're trying to do with Evidexa is model the disposition and the core traits of behavior over time, which does a couple things. One is it allows us to simulate in a repeatable evidence-based structure versus where you use personas or user testing. I don't know the state that people are in. And then I have to do a lot of power assumptions around how to apply that to my digital product and assume it's going to work for everybody. The other big risk is diversity, right? Typically those hand raisers are raising their hand because, for the social good, they're interested in research.
Mm-hmm.
Or, some raise their hands because they're looking for the incentive. And that bias is the population, and it necessarily doesn't find the people. When you think about massive scale of populations that suffer from disease, it doesn't really represent the whole. And with the power of digital twins, what we're trying to do is democratize that, create an opportunity, not replacement, right? Because you'll still have to, go through the regulatory grade evidence, but at least make sure you're spending your capital in a wise way. And in your early product life cycle and your commercial decisions, you're able to have access to those insights, the foresight, in order to tune your product, change your messaging, support a commercial decision, those sorts of things.
Okay, great explanation. Thank you. Digital twins, I would like to understand a little bit more, and for our audience, a little bit more about them, because in production, in car industry, in various different aspects of production, different industries, we have this concept for testing and simulating behaviors, but it's slightly different for humans, right? We, by definition, we're slightly not predictable, like you said. So how do you design a system to actually be a digital twin of a specific human being with a specific condition?
We could probably spend a whole episode, Lucas, on defining digital twin as a concept. We've received some early feedback from, our customers and the market that to be careful with the word digital twin, rightly so, because I think it is used in many different contexts, as you said, right? From, simulation of industrial production lines and creating digital twins of how things flow through that, to in the healthcare space, the sort of the ultimate digital twin is a whole representation of the cell. So the digital specimen, if you will, which mimics how proteins fold in fantastical stuff that we don't do.
Okay.
What we create essentially is focused solely on behavioral aspects of the human. And we like to say it's, creating a simulation environment, much like a wind tunnel, where you can test and repeat and whatnot. So our digital twins are based solely on the fundamentals of behavioral science. So we're able to extract from the population through some of the tooling that we have those behavioral dispositions and traits. And then the one thing we don't do as well is we don't create a true twin. So Lucas and Jeff are not represented as twins in the environment, but what's represented is the attributes that imbue us as a human with our behaviors. And those are what we then resaturate into the simulation environment that represents the population, if you will. So in practice, right? So you come to me and say, hey, Jeff, I have a population of migraine patients that I want to simulate and test my new symptom management app, right? So I've developed an app that's going to help people suffering from migraine manage their condition. They would come to me and say, in the population, I'm making some numbers up, but there's 1 million migraine patients, there's 1 million people suffering from migraines. Can you simulate those? We would say, okay, 1 million is a bit extreme. We're not going to do that, but we're going to look at the population curve and we're going to say, okay, for that, there's, this diversity of patients, which is context and state. And then we're going to say there's these dispositions of behaviors, which is that core thing that we're trying to simulate. And then we're going to launch that into our simulation environment for you to test.
Fantastic. That sounds really great. And how does just out of curiosity, well, maybe it's too deep, then tell me if it's too deep. How do you build the attributes on your population? Is this done by AI, or is this done by an actual still human being, that data engineer who also understands healthcare or specific health problem domain?
We have clinicians on as part of the founding team, right? So we have practicing psychologists that have joined the team, and they're part of the founding team of what we are. Their responsibility is solely for understanding the behavioral dynamics of the population and how to translate that into machine learning algorithms that then populate our meta model, if you will. So what we've done, we've looked at a lot of data because, in healthcare, there's a ton of data, but unfortunately, a lot of that data is not at the specificity or the level that we need that captures human behavior. So we have to go generate our data. So we actually launched a whole other product, which we call Evidexa Nexus, which is an AI to human, speech to speech psychologist in many ways. I'll be very careful with that term because my co-founder not like it, but I call it that because it's a simple way to grasp the concept. But the AI actually will call you. It will walk you through what we call a behavioral insight interview. And from that interview, we then have a series of agents that are trained in their domain, for a specific behavioral disposition, that look at the raw data, and their sole job is just to look at data, extract the attributes, and populate our meta model. So we have one agent, which we call DEXI, and DEXI is designed by psychiatrists and based on behavioral science, and it conducts the interview. And then we have a series of agents that look at that data and then extract those behavioral dispositions and populate our meta model. And that's the front end of the process. And then we have a whole other set of agents and AI that take those attributes and create the simulation environments for which we run, which we can dive into as well, Lucas, on how that works as well.
No, that's brilliant. That's it's a fantastic explanation. Cool. Just one last question on this topic, I promise. Do you have a model that discovers emotion of the individual that is being transcribed from voice to text?
Yeah, like can we detect a motive, certain dispositions of the voice? We haven't explored that necessarily because it's not sort of core to creating the attributes that we need to power a model. But in theory, yes, right? I mean, Evidexa Nexus is built in such a way where it's, in many ways, it's a campaign engine, and you can deploy new tools against the data that we've collected. Tool being a trained machine learning, regression learning, algorithm, or it could be, some other tooling that we've designed, or, we're happy to explore with partners, right? There's a lot of partners out there that have focused on using voice to do diagnostics, for example, for major just depression disorder and things like that. And so there's a rich opportunity in that environment for us to partner to help us expand our data set. Our data set too, I think just I'm going to touch on this quickly, is
fantastic.
We're generating a sampling of 2,000 people, general population people, as our initial data set. So that's actively running. But our goal over time is to represent as many people as we can. So we, through the Evidexa Nexus product, we want to collect millions of people's data and support them in this journey. And I think that creates a rich opportunity for partnership and discovery and all sorts of great things.
Yeah, totally. I see that. And with your current and past experiences, right, in commercializing these kind of technologies, what's your take on the strongest demand currently in AI and hence behavioral insights in healthcare? Yeah,
so demand right now is, it shows up where, the evidence is required early, but those live studies are too slow or too expensive. So where we're seeing our current demand is with those companies that are building rare chronic disease programs. So those are focused in, specialty pharma, those sorts of areas where there's an opportunity to help a person suffering from a disease either get an earlier diagnosis, or there's an opportunity to support a person in their treatment journey once they've been diagnosed. And the reason being is developing that early evidence, both for building a solution as well as making sure that it'll be adopted, is really cost prohibitive and capital expensive and resource intensive. So that's where we're seeing a lot of demand for this type of simulation evidence.
Yeah.
and it's resonating quite well on both sides. So one side is the hospital systems, the health systems that want to adopt. They're looking at Evidexa as what they call lack of a better term, a bench test. So you can imagine on their side, they're getting pitched hundreds of solutions from startups that say we have the next best thing that'll help your patient population. But they don't have enough time to run every pilot. Pilots are expensive. And so they have to, create a signal from the noise.
Of course.
And then on the other side, you have the innovators that we want to empower them because we want to make sure their solution scales and that they're getting adopted. So we're trying to really close the gap between those two. But the demand's strongest right now for us in the digital health solution space, mainly. And then interestingly, we're starting to see, as we expose the solution to more and more stakeholders at these customers, they're bringing some really unique use cases to us, which we're extremely excited about. But being a startup, we have to pace ourselves. But I'll give you a flavor of one. One being is workforce burnout.
Sure.
So in the health systems, there's a big issue with clinician burnout, and I think we all know the problem. There's an aging population, there's more disease, there's more demand on clinicians. And unfortunately, there's not enough nurse practitioners and clinicians to go around. And that creates a high burnout propensity for these clinicians, which causes all sorts of bad effects in the system downstream. And there are health systems that are interested in using Evidexa because we're able to capture those underlying dispositions of behavior to model their clinician population to understand the burnout potential or how to use that data to optimize their workforce or where clinicians are placed. So where I'm heading is we stumbled onto something really important and critical for the digital health space, but there's a lot of applicability in other domains as well.
Mm-hmm. And the initial data intake about those potential patient profiles, can this happen independently from any sort of research or request from your innovator side? So for example, at the hospital intake.
Yeah, it could. And you're saying specifically around how we generate the data?
Because I see a great potential in trying to understand at which point your data is, you have a general population data without any specifics, but potentially someone comes in and asks you about burnout or a specific condition that they want to, simulate in those profiles that you have collected so far. Because it's either this or you're producing the data, as I understood it, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, or you're producing the data case by case basis for each innovator, which then I guess I'm asking about the reusability of each sample, how anonymous it is, and how can you do the intake without risking that it's just for one specific case?
Yeah, no, great question too, because what we're doing is, so the Evidexa data is essentially we're licensing. There's obviously an application around it that allows people to run the experiments and studies, but the data itself is sort of what's core and unique. So the data is applicable to all, is really our goal. And we're investing in building the initial data set.
Mm-hmm.
But as we onboard a customer, they might say, to your point, well, I have a unique population, or I have some other data I want to collect, or I have my own data that I want to add to the mix. And we can do that and carve off their data for them and for what they need. So that's the power of Nexus, right? Nexus in many ways is a campaign engine where you can launch these assessments and you can launch these AI human agents to do all sorts of different types of data capture, data collection. So at the core of it, the data is the economy, right? We're using that to make sure it's applicable to all of our customers. How you use it is the power of Evidexa as a core platform, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That would be the core business then of the data licensing. So.
Yeah.
And I understand that after the intake, because you keep the recording or transcript, you can still rerun other models or plug in different learning functions or data enhancement functions afterwards, right? Retrospectively.
Yeah, well, this is where we have to be careful, right? Because when we conduct these interviews of humans, right? If I was to call you Lucas or your loved ones or family, the nature of the interview is quite personalized and has a lot of health information and mental health information. So we necessarily don't retain that data. What we do is we extract what we need, de-identify it, and we aggregate it with the population level data, which then becomes the power of Evidexa.
Mm-hmm.
So there is the opportunity based off of the attributes that we extract to rerun different models and whatnot, but we're very careful about the data processor, data controller relationship
of course,
how Evidexa is a data processor and what data it manages, to adhere to data privacy laws like GDPR and data privacy laws, at the state level in the United States, so that we don't trip that up, right? So most of our data collection, at least the initial cohort that we're generating, there's a separate legal entity that exists that is the data controller.
Mm-hmm.
And their whole responsibility is, explicit consent, how we use the data, how it's licensed to Evidexa downstream so we can build those models responsibly.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the major complexities, right? Hearing you sitting at as well.
Yeah.
The regulatory aspects. That's what I meant when initially I asked if we could have like some sort of, test environment where people would consent to say, look, as long as my name is not mentioned anywhere, you can reuse this data for improving your models, for improving your algorithms in an anonymized way, right? But I guess we're still not there, right? That would require a regulatory change or mind shift, right?
Yeah, I would think so. It's a complicated area, to your point. We're walking some novel lines of innovation, in terms of how we use, frontier models like, Claude and OpenAI and Gemini, et cetera. And we're walking a lot of novel lines around regulatory and compliance, how this data is used to create the twins. It's a complicated space, and I think the journey of Evidexa is starting, right? We've launched this year and to great success, both technical success and customer success. But there's a journey to go, right? I think when we think about regulatory landscape being a big one. So it'll be interesting to see how Evidexa can influence if we have that power, to make those changes. But
yeah, be part of the ongoing discussion, right? That's always interesting.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, we have a dream where Evidexa currently where we're seeing demand, it fits in a particular space where you need that early evidence, and that helps you optimize downstream investments you'll make in other research, which will always be required, right? There's a concept in regulated software where you have notified bodies, or the agency being the FDA,
sure,
where you have to signal safety and efficacy of these software as a medical device. And you still need to run that evidence. But the goal for Evidexa is we help you optimize that run ultimately, as one of our value propositions. But I do see a world where these notified bodies and agencies potentially will say, simulation evidence is equal or better than what they can run in the real world. So it becomes, in many ways, real world evidence based off simulated humans, and that we can trust that data and make regulatory oversight decisions. That's sort of the dream, not tomorrow, but, in the near future that we want to run towards. And that way we create this whole new novel way of generating evidence and insights to unlock the power of what digital health can be at scale.
Understood. Yeah, pretty cool. And on a patient level, you don't have any, so to say, B2C experience, right? Because you always do it on the behalf of a innovator, right? Or regulatory aspects. So there's no need to have like I'm going to make this up, gamified experience for your patients to participate in even simulated data intake for sake of, building those profiles, finding out about the attributes in different cases. So for example, I have ADHD, right? So knowing that I could participate in some sort of AI conversation, I do that with surveys and of some sort, right? And psychologists or psychiatrists are asking if I want to do it. I say, well, yeah, why not, right? they're anonymized. When I fill in the surveys, I suppose that could be the conversation with your voice-to-voice model instead. And that could be much more interesting for even individuals like myself. Like I would be keen on doing this just to progress on the general understanding of the condition, right?
Yeah, our co-founder, Maitri Patel, she's our clinician, and she likes to say, humans are very happy to talk about themselves, and I think it speaks, Lucas, to your point, right? Like, we want to collect that data because that's sort of the role of psychology and psychiatrists that practice, is that they engage in these open-ended conversations. And through those conversations, they're able to profile us as individuals and learn all about our behavioral dimensions, traits and dispositions, et cetera, much less our behavioral health as well, be it ADHD or be it depression or other conditions. But to your point, the B2C play really comes in that angle. So Evidexa as a core product is really a B2B play where we're, selling to founders, innovators, and adopters. The other side of the house, back to my point, like the ability to collect the data, we created a separate legal entity. In this case, we created a concept called Pathways to Health Index. And that's what we're using as the B2C experience. So Pathways is really a website, a landing page where you can go and register and you can sign up for your profile, basically, to talk with the AI interviewer. And then what you get in return is what we call a Pathways Index. It's essentially a report about your underlying behavioral dispositions that affect how you make health decisions. So it's an insights report that we're generating, giving back value for people participating in the Pathways, let's call it a study. But over time, that Pathways becomes the B2C, at least what we're offering to the market. Now, the beauty of it is the way we built Evidexa Nexus is, again, we could partner with all sorts of, be it nonprofits or patient advocacy or even, people interested in studying human behavior, and they could use Evidexa Nexus to launch their own studies. The value is they control the data. They can do whatever they want to do for value exchange with the participant. But what Evidexa always gets is the anonymized aggregated data to power our digital twin models. So we're kind of building a data economy, data flywheel with that aspect of the solution.
Right.
Now our B2C play, again, like I said, it's Pathways, but we can imagine, there could be particular, consumer plays that are specifically targeted to ADHD, as an example.
Mm-hmm. And can anyone use this Pathways landing page, or is it just per invitation?
Right now it's per invitation, so we're controlling the experience because, again, it's part of the startup life cycle, right? We're testing and learning as we're launching, and right now it's US focused mainly because we're in the US and we understand those privacy and,
of course,
privacy and transparency laws better than we would in EU countries. And it's 22 and plus right now. So we're being very specific around making sure people are adults and that we're not getting a bunch of students just participating for the fun of it. So we're learning about how to tune Pathways and create the value exchange and control privacy and the fairness of it.
Cool. And beyond regulatory challenges, in your view, what are the most common barriers that organizations on either public side, healthcare side, or innovator side face when they try to adopt AI in their research or in their products?
Yeah, it's AI is it's a fascinating space right now, I would say, right? Because there's so much innovation happening quickly on these frontier models.
Yeah.
For us, so there's two sides of the barrier. One is like, how do you adopt Evidexa, and what's the barrier to that entry point? And the other is, if you're an organization considering AI, whether it's to augment your current product or envision a new product, how does that responsibly fit in, and what's that barrier? So from my perspective, the barrier is really rarely the technology. It always comes back to AI as an augmentation tool, and making sure that there's real issues you're solving, and there's an intended use and whatnot. Specific for Evidexa, it's all about the misaligned outputs tied to the innovation cycle as a barrier. So that extends, right? As we think about those. Oh, go ahead, Lucas.
Sorry, I'm not sure what these are. So if you could just clarify for me, what do you mean, like those outputs, misaligned outputs? Like, what would be the example?
Oh, yeah. So misaligned outputs. When you run evidence cycles, you're early on in digital. You have the signals that help you make decisions of, do we add this feature, or how do we tune this message? Those sorts of things. So those outputs tend to be early, or either bench research. So we're using either prior knowledge that we have, or we're using prior case from published materials and those sorts of things. And those outputs are misaligned because it doesn't really keep pace with the decisions you need to make, if that makes sense.
Got it.
So the intended use is there. We want to use evidence and research, but the outputs are being misaligned to the decisions you're making. And so that creates a complication. But that's more, I think, where I'm going with that. It's more of a opportunity for Evidexa and not necessarily a barrier. The barrier within that is the change management, right? So Evidexa is entering the scene. We say, hey, we have this new way to generate foresight and insights and new evidence modalities, and we can help you optimize spend. That's a risk, right? Because people will say, well, how do I adopt that when I know I have these small end panels of patients, and I have this desk research that I could use to make decisions? And so disrupting that is a barrier for entry for us overall. The conversation kind of drifted there, Lucas, but I think what I see is there's two barriers, right?
Yes.
One is like there's people that want to adopt AI, and that's a barrier itself because AI is fantastical and has a lot of promise. And then we've leveraged AI to build up Evidexa. But at the same time, we face barriers for people to adopt us because it's new, it's novel. So there's this paradoxical loop, if you will, that circles around these two things.
Yeah, absolutely. And funnily enough, I think healthcare environment is particularly slow on that, right? Because there's a lot of fear, maybe, or doubts about, what happens to this data, the regulatory aspect of some of the conversations about the bigger LLM providers and how they have trained their models, right? So that's all open questions.
I think it's more to the latter point, though, because I would say people in healthcare in general, be it life sciences or healthcare in general, we're a suspicious bunch, right? So we always question if there's something new and how it works, and making sure there's evidence that it works before we adopt, which is why we have the whole situation with digital health adoption and scale to begin with, right? And why we ask for evidence to prove this thing works. And bringing a novel solution like Evidexa is the same. So we have to prove to them that it works, that we represent, the population of behaviors, and that those simulations can support them in the decisions that they need to make. So we have our own validation and evidence paradox, to use that word as well, to drive that adoption. It's rarely about because they do evidence generation today. So it's rarely about the ability to go talk to people. It's just that, doing traditional research methodologies today is just time expensive, resource intensive. It just takes too long in order to iterate and build a digital product.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, years and 5 2 digits in the millions usually, right? So absolutely. I wonder, because one of the most common aspects that I hear and see as a pushback at, I don't know, whether it's a hospital or clinic or patient side, is how do we avoid bias for, I guess that's one of the main reasons why any sort of automatic or AI-driven diagnosis tools are currently not so widely used, right? Because you can't rely solely on them. And then in my experience, doctors would say, listen, this is an extra step and effort for me to get that data, even if it's just a recording, put that in the system. And I already know what my diagnosis is.
Mm.
So why would they listen to something which either exaggerates or downplays the symptoms into something which is not the correct conclusion? That being my experience, I wonder what is your protection against this kind of bias in your view in the Evidexa or any other AI system that is applied to healthcare?
Yeah, it's an interesting debate and conversation to have of where bias shows up and why, right? So if we built Evidexa in a way which solely relied on frontier models, meaning we ride the backs of OpenAI and the training they've done, there's inherently bias in the data they use to build their model. In many ways, that's a good thing and bad thing for us, and we can talk about that. So that's one area where bias would show up, but we don't do that, right? We just don't go out, and say, hey, here's this LLM, we're going to use them and prompt engineer it and create a digital twin based off of the training set that lives in that model. That's high risk, right? And there's actually competitors out there doing that, where they'll go basically scrape data from the web and build quote unquote a authentic persona and then claim that as a twin, and people use that to generate insights. But there's a lot of danger in that because they don't really control it. It's not repeatable. Repeatable meaning if I put my simulated thing into it on Tuesday and then I go back Friday, it's going to give me very different responses. And how do I make decisions off of that? Let alone the bias that it introduces. So that's one area that bias shows up, is at these frontier models. The other is in the data we collect as well. And so as we build our data, we have to be very careful that we don't collect data that's overly biased towards a particular population, or identity of people, right? And that we have a representation and we truly understand the disposition and the dispersion of behaviors across that population, and make sure it's diverse based on what we know about populations, through epidemiology data and other data sets. So we have to control bias on the front end, and then we have to control bias in the middle. What I mean by the middle is we take their data and then we put that into our meta model and then reconstitute populations. So we're being very careful not to do a one-to-one mapping, back to the point of we're not creating a twin of Lucas. We're taking your attributes and the dispersion of the population behaviors and repopulating that into a simulated environment to control that bias. So we have more control over how the population looks.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do have to ride the frontier models as well, because that's where agents and the novel technology exist. But we do something different in where we do LLM switching. So we don't rely on one model. We'll switch between models because we want sort of the chaotic environment of different LLMs as we run our simulated populations, if you will. And so we hope that helps control bias from our perspective. Now, proof's in the pudding, we have to validate that and demonstrate that, and that creates a journey for us as well, how we do that.
All right. And your intent is to create your own models and train your own models on that data as well, on that filtered out intake data that you collect?
Yeah, we won't ever build our own LLM. Mm-hmm. It's for where we are as a startup in this journey. That's out of reach for us in many ways. What we are building, what we own, is the translation of raw data to the attribute data. So the machine learning process there, and there we use, open weighted models, and we tune those models and we make those models ours, and we do our own reinforcement learning on those with our staff. And so that middle layer we control. We don't want to really control the LLMs because it's to our benefit that, Gemini and, Cortana and whomever's, right? Whatever next wave is coming, they built their models trained on their data sets, and we can, in many ways, leverage that to our benefit because it creates different behaviors when you run the same agent on different frontier models, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Do you get always deterministic results with this flow for any intake, or the same intake multiple times, going through your entire pipeline of models and machine learning processes that you have designed?
Yes. Yeah. And that's the goal. So we're reaching a point where we're seeing the repeatability through the MLOps process. The output, so when we imbue the agents, the frontier model agents, with the parameters to control them, we're seeing better control there as well. So that becomes more deterministic, and now we don't know, and we don't want to control it, right? So the whole point is when we run a simulation, we want to know, we imbue those agents with the behaviors that we want to give them, and then we observe them. And so we're learning about things like comprehension, intent, knowledge, action. And so those are the patterns we're looking to get back. And we don't really want that to be deterministic. We want it to be more organic in the sense that we want to see how the agents behave in the real world. Real world being simulated world, but you see what I'm saying. But the front end of the process is deterministic. Like, we know the pipeline of getting raw data to the attributes we want, and that's repeatable. Now, when you ask for a population, back to the example of 1,000 migraine patients, we'll say, okay, we want to represent this dispersion of behaviors, populate the twins, and then go run that in a simulation environment. We're observing that as much as we would observe you and I in the real world in what we do. You can't really make deterministic logic on that because I don't know what Lucas is going to do next.
True, but I mean, like for attribution and for identification of certain, symptoms to results or response to a medication, is that for a specific input will always give the same output, right? That's how I meant it by the literal definition.
But we don't. So that's why we stop short at behavior, right? Because if we start trying to model therapy response to, a migraine medication as a drug product, that's a very different solution than what we are. So we live at the experience layer, not necessarily the biologic layer, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. If you could elaborate on this a little bit more. So how I understood it so far, you have patient population details. If I am a company who is interested in this either for research or testing my solution, it doesn't have to be a pill, it could be some sort of, meditation, maybe an app, right? How would you then run that pipeline for them to produce hints that it can go left or right, whichever way at the end, with that population?
Yeah, so maybe to walk back to one point. So the experience layer, right? So when you think about digital health is a simple equation in my mind, right? It's data science plus behavioral science wrapped around an experience layer. Experience drives engagement. It makes sure people, onboard and whatnot. Drug products, like an actual pill or a subcutaneous injection, for your GLP-1 or whatnot, that experience is pretty limited, right? A pill, I take it out of a bottle, I swallow it. It's probably the most basic experience in the world.
Yeah.
Now, injecting is a little different because you bring in the fear of needles and sort of other aspects of the experience. We don't really need to model that, and because it's well known, it's been proven. Now, digital health, we need to model, and the solutions that we engage with every day do this for a living, right? Be it Netflix, be it Instagram. They use behavioral science to their advantage to create engagement and, reoccurring, use of the solutions. Digital health hasn't had that because of, again, back to the point of the regulated environment that we work in and our inability to generate real human interactions at scale, right? So we can't go to a 10,000 person population pool and do A/B experimentations with digital health. It just doesn't work. That scale breaks. So Evidexa is filling that need by empowering digital health innovators and adopters the experience layer to say, okay, well, you can take your solution, run it through our environment, and we can help you understand, is the population comprehending what you're doing? Do they understand the feature that you're just wanting to launch? Do they have intention, or are they taking action? And then more importantly, we can simulate over time, how an agent will go through your app, if you will. And we know where the breakpoints are, where they're hanging up in terms of reading, because of comprehension level issues, those sorts of things. So we're helping tune the digital experience layer, not the mechanism of action. So the mechanism of action could be like, if you went through this experience, I could reduce the number of migraine days you have. And that's a clinical claim. But to do that, I need you to engage with the solution. That's a behavioral experience claim, and that's where we help.
My next question is about one of the biggest fears that is going through people's minds these days when they hear AI, especially in general populace, which is the loss of jobs, right? But I really kind of feel that in what you do, there is no equivalent. It's not like you're really substituting anything or taking away from an existing setup, right? Because it can be done at this scale. It's just not that you're going to replace behavioral scientists. I think you're just going to empower them, if I understood the entire conversation. Yeah. But if you could comment on that for me.
Yeah, no, it's exactly how you framed it, right? AI to me is always the great augmentation capability, right? I don't necessarily see it replacing, at least in today's AI world, it's not going to replace large populations of jobs at scale. For us in particular, the human has to define the question, the research question. They have to interpret the trade-offs and make the decision and decide what matters from the results that we're giving them. To your point, we're an augmentation tool because the way they would do that today is they're doing it in very low-powered studies. Low-powered meaning populations of 10 patients that represent 1 million patients. And that's a huge trade-off for these innovators, right? To make pretty critical feature go-to-market decisions and commercial decisions based off really low-powered studies. And so we give them the power and help augment what they do, not as a replacement, but truly as a multiplier, to make better informed decisions, of what should the solution do? How should we tune our messaging? How should we tune our onboarding experience? How do we bring evidence to a potential adopter that says, yes, this will work for your population? And the goal ultimately is to scale digital health at the end of the day. I'll say one thing like related to us, our mission statement imbues that, right? Our mission statement is to shape the future of health by empowering the innovators building it. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to like how we see AI playing a role as well. It's really empowering the innovator, the builder, not necessarily replacing jobs. It's helping us make better decisions and, make more informed plans and products, that will scale.
I feel the same. And my observation also is that we are, and in pretty much any specialization in healthcare, significantly understaffed these days, at least in Europe. From simple technicians who run X-ray machines to specialists. So anything that can parallelize or speed up or simplify in that area is more than welcome, probably.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that general populace is still afraid of it. So
yeah, I think we don't know, right? I mean, there's a lot of media out there and there's a lot of promise of what these solutions are, even from the frontier models building it, right? I don't know if you have these advertisements in the EU, but in the US, we have OpenAI ads on TV, which is fascinating to me. Like OpenAI is like, you know, doing consumer marketing and saying, you know, hey, use our solutions and we can help, you know, in many ways. What they're subtly saying is we can replace your travel advisor. I'm like, can you? Like, it's a good claim, but I think backing it up is key. But Lucas, you brought up a really good point though, is I think AI is truly, if it's used correctly, is a really great augmentation tool, especially in healthcare for all the reasons you said. The population isn't getting necessarily healthier, and there's a higher demand on health services, but there's less people to support them. So AI can show up in many ways across that journey and help remove things that we shouldn't just be doing, right? Administrative burden, you know, for prior approvals of a procedure.
Oh yeah.
Like, spend the time with the patient and, you know, helping them navigate. Don't spend time with the, you know, the administrative burden, and let AI handle that, right? So it's not really a job replacement in that sense, but it unlocks opportunities for us to better support people that are suffering from disease. And Evidexa plays a role in that. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously we're not dealing with administrative burden and those sorts of things with what we're doing, but we're making sure that technology is responsibly built and responsibly adopted, and giving people access to, you know, evidence that they have, or giving people the opportunity to generate evidence they priorly didn't have.
Brilliant. Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing. And no, we don't have ads in you on the streets for AI, but I know what you mean. I've been to New York and seen some of these there. They're pretty cool, and sometimes really,
yeah.
I think it's a bit of a marketing trick over actual reality of what they can do. I'm not going to name the company, but they were literally saying like, our AI never sleeps. Would you still employ people knowing this? You know, it's really, really direct messaging.
Yeah. I mean, there's a beauty and a curse to the U.S. advertisement system, but
yeah. On the other hand, you know, it doesn't happen in here because we are overly regulated to not use AI, which is a significant downside. But to your other point, I wonder if you see yourself or market or someone filling in the void for data duplication. It's one of the biggest nightmares that I see in you in terms of patient journey, is that you answer the same questions in multiple places, on the intake, on the form, paper form, still that someone then moves manually to computer or two different systems because even EHRs are not properly talking to one another. And then doctor still asks you the same question afterwards. Yeah. And then maybe nurse, when she's, you know, injecting you with something, or she still asks you that. So it's really interesting to see if first of all, your perspective on this, because it seems from someone like myself who comes from a tech industry, obviously I'm tremendously in the bubble, right, and biased about these things, how many things can be simplified immediately, not even before we even start the conversation about the AI.
Yeah.
So I wonder, what do you feel Evidexa or your other company could, you know, what's your perspective personally, or your business's perspectives on that?
Yeah, maybe from the Evidexa standpoint, I don't know if we'll ever move into that space because it is a complicated space. You know, sort of who owns the data has always been a question. And when I say the data, in this case, I mean patient data, my data about my disease, my journey.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's mine to own, but I'm never giving the power to do it. So in the US, we have some interesting things, right? There's a thing they call the Blue Button, which is an initiative where I can access my patient records and I can own those. Apple, you know, through their innovation, has given us some control over that, but it's still not complete. And then there's some other innovators around the space that have thought through it around, how do I bring together Jeff's patient records into one single view for the benefit of him, but also for the benefit of his treating clinicians. There's really no holy grail there yet, I would say, that's scalable. Evidexa's position in that is, if I am building one of those innovations, we want to make sure it's going to work for the masses by, again, giving them the support for the behavioral experience evidence they need to build it. My perspective is there's data repeated everywhere within healthcare. So there's patient data repeated, there's market research data that's repeated. And there are opportunities for Evidexa to support in-market research data, and consolidating that and preventing that from being repeated. Patient data, I don't necessarily have a good answer for.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an interesting intersection of patient engagement, like how engaged is Jeff to own and collect his data, and how aware is he of his disease? And, I'm talking about myself in the third person here, but just as an example.
Sure.
Because if I'm not engaged and if I don't really care that I'm about managing my disease, I'll never own that data. It's just never an incentive for me.
Sure.
And then as a clinician, I only see that clinician, once every year, maybe. They're not really incentivized to own it. They're incentivized to process my billing for the claims, and my health insurance is the same, right? They're just trying to manage risk for me as a person in their population and not really own my data. So that nobody's really in the ecosystem incentivized to own patient data. Nor the patient isn't, the treating clinician isn't, the health system isn't. And I think until we solve that incentive problem of like who truly owns it, it'll always be broken. At least the patient data aspect of it.
I always thought that it's that electronic health record companies have the incentive, right? Because that's their core business, to deploy those huge EHR systems to hospitals and everywhere.
Yeah, but think about it. Like EHR data, very powerful data, but most of it is billing code data.
Oh, okay.
I saw Lucas did this procedure, and we can make a lot of health understanding of those procedural codes, but at the end of the day, it's code management.
Mm.
Now we have new technologies like ambient listening in the clinician office, which are picking up the nuanced discussions that are happening between doctor and clinician. But we don't really know what to do with that data, right? So back to the physician burnout conversation, right? Now we have more data. What are we doing to the clinician? Like, how do they make decisions on that? How do they not rely on their intuition and their education to make decisions? And now you have these other signals coming at them. So it creates a really interesting conversation to be had around, again, who's really incentivized to own it and manage it.
Some sort of innovation or innovator should proceed with solving this, basically, right? And that's the business case that needs to be built.
Well, you would say that, but that becomes dangerous, especially in the US market, because why would an innovator do it? They would only do it to monetize it.
Yeah, certainly.
Right. And I don't know if the general population wants their health data monetized for adverts or whatnot, however they use it. It needs to be solved. I 100% agree with you, Lucas. I just don't know who's incentivized to solve it in a responsible way.
Absolutely. Well, let's park this one for the next episode.
That is a deep dive into a lot of intellectual conversation there.
Super. Jeff, thank you so much. Thank you for joining today and sharing your thoughts, and very, very fruitful discussion. Really appreciate that.
No, I appreciate it, Lucas. And I really enjoyed the conversation. We explored a lot, but I was very happy to share the Evidexa story and what we're trying to solve. Sounds amazing. Super. Fingers crossed. And we'll put all the details about that as well to the footnotes so people can find both companies and information about them. And the other one, what was it? The pathways. Perhaps one day it will be open and anyone can volunteer to participate. Yeah. I'll be very keen on trying this out. Yeah, look forward. If you have a wait list, I'm happy to jump on it. We are looking for early customers, and I'll send you the survey link, Lucas, and maybe if anything, we could publish that to the population. Super. Your audience, I mean, and we can go from there.
Thank you for sharing your experience and perspective. It is clear that AI-powered behavioral models are opening a completely new chapter in how we understand customers and patients. This approach has the potential to accelerate research, improve predictive power, and better align with real human behavior. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on The Dev is in the Details. If you enjoyed this conversation, remember to subscribe and leave a review. If your organization is exploring AI or considering how behavioral modeling could support your strategy, feel free to reach out. We're here to help you navigate the details and build what truly works. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode. Until next time.